Early signing day is behind us, and it's time to focus our attention on the Penn State Nittany Lions and the Peach Bowl. I talk with Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions right after this.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, a former staff member at Ole Miss and a 10-year veteran as a member of the national media at Yahoo. Today on the show, we step into the Thunderdome with Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions to talk about the Peach Bowl and Penn State. As I mentioned, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day, and a special hello to all the everydayers that make the show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with every winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. We have been heavy recruiting lately, but we have not lost sight of the Penn State game that is coming up, heck, a week from Saturday. And next week, we will have our normal game week type shows where we do, what we learned and the keys to victory and what to watch for and the normal crossover with Locked On Nittany Lions. We have all that planned for next week, but we are going to do another crossover with Zach Seyko from Locked On Nittany Lions. We're going to step into Thunderdome. We're going to find out the storylines that are important to everybody in State College and in Oxford, Mississippi, and it should be a lot of fun. Anyway, let's get started. Let's go. Zach Seyko from Locked On Nittany Lions. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis from Locked On Ole Miss, and we are in Thunderdome. You can tell by the surroundings all around us. And we're going to talk about the Peach Bowl game that's coming up in about 10 days. How you doing, Zach?
I'm doing great. I'm glad we get to do another one of these crossover episodes because I feel like there is a lot to preview in this case. This isn't just some ordinary game.
No, this is a big game, especially with what Ole Miss has been doing in the transfer portal for momentum for the next season. We're waiting on potentially Walter Nolan to announce. It might by the time people are watching this right now, but Ole Miss has a chance for all the momentum in the world after the Peach Bowl, but they need the Peach Bowl win to really set it ablaze. If they win the game against Penn State, they might come into 2024 in a preseason number 4 type ranking.
I got to think so, especially with what they've been able to get from the transfer portal. Ole Miss, I see the Lane Kiffin extension. You're in talks for some of the top players in former recruiting classes. These aren't just Penn State is adding depth pieces. Ole Miss, and thank goodness I know they couldn't adjust that quickly to play in the game. But my goodness, I don't know that I'd want to face Ole Miss a year from now. And that very well could happen with the 12-team playoff, Stephen. We might do a crossover in a year's time.
Yeah, and that would be absolutely great. I would love for the people from State College, Pennsylvania, to come down to Vaught-Hemingway Stadium and see how that goes. And, let's get that second meeting going and everything. I'm looking forward to this game against Penn State because Penn State is a name. And it's somebody that you haven't played. And I might have talked about this last week, but Ole Miss has played Texas Tech more times in the last 25 years than they've played Tennessee. And that's just bowl games. Ole Miss fans do not want Big 12 teams ever. Texas Tech and Oklahoma State, it almost seems like it's an annual occurrence. So the fact that Ole Miss is playing a Big 10 team, and not only that, a Big 10 team such as Penn State that has the name that goes with it, I think that Ole Miss fans are going to be pretty excited about this game. And I think 40,000 Ole Miss fans are going to be in Atlanta a week from Saturday.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and Penn State fans travel very well, too. So you're going to get, I think, I would lean that it's kind of like the same thing with the Rose Bowl. Some of those games are tougher to be in attendance for. but it's not. It's kind of like the games that the Outback Bowls, some of the Orange Bowl, right? That Penn State has played in over the past 2 decades, right? I'm going back a little further, but those Florida Bowl games have been easier for Penn State fans to travel to. So I can't imagine that Atlanta, Georgia is going to be too far off the map. But Nittany Lion fans do travel very well. So even though Mississippi is geographically closer, Penn State fans will certainly be in attendance.
Yeah, and it's a situation. The Peach Bowl is the weird bowl game. If you look, if you look at bowl games out there, it usually sells out. I think they're expanding capacity for this game. There's going to be 80,000 people in that building. It's going to
Sure.
be an atmosphere that is similar to a regular season game, especially when you look at all these cavernous stadiums during bowl games. I'm telling you, I hate that this game. I think it's a noon Eastern kickoff,
Yep.
because it has a chance to be really, really fun.
Well, if for Penn State's perspective, this is pretty par for the course because all of these games are because Fox, NBC, CBS, and Fox has had first dibs on a lot of the high profile games. They're like, "Yep, this is another big noon game." So for all the Nittany Lion fans, for the Nittany Lion media, this is nothing different. This is totally expected, or I guess not necessarily expected, but we're used to this kind of thing.
Yeah, forget about that from time to time because it's going to be an exact opposite type situation. I think the way that
Mhm.
TV companies are setting it up now, there's going to be some counter programming by ESPN and ABC against Big Noon. But
Mhm.
if you look at the primetime game, that's where ABC, once they're getting the SEC slot next year, you're going to have two major national ABC SEC games pretty much
Yep.
every week. And I think it's going to be the 2:30 and the 7 o'clock at night slot. And then Big Noon, they're going to program it against it. But I think Fox might be smart for trying to own that time slot.
Well, I know that from I won't go too far into it because we're talking Penn State Ole Miss, but I know that Fox, CBS, NBC want to be able to line it up where they have basically the whole day of college football, where they have the one game to kick off at noon, 3:30, 7:30 Eastern time, right? And then what is formerly the Pac-12, the four teams coming over to the Big Ten, and have those games still later on at night. So eyeballs will be on the Big Ten through CBS, NBC, Fox, whoever those networks are in the later hours. But that's what they want to do. They want to dominate the whole Saturday from noon Eastern time to after midnight.
Yeah. And it's honestly the same thing that they're playing. Let's just be real about this. At the end of the day, everybody was talking about the Power Five conferences were going to break away and there's going to be a 64 team super conference and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case. I think it's not going to be much bigger than it is right now with the Big Ten and the SEC, maybe a few more teams, but that looks to be the direction that college football is going.
Yeah, money talks.
Mhm.
And the TV networks have a lot of influence and a lot of people have bought into it.
Anyway, early signing day was Wednesday. How are Penn State fans transitioning from the signing day? Because if Penn State is like Ole Miss, we have been engrossed in the transfer portal and in recruiting leading up to this. It's kind of dominated our entire thoughts to where we're going to have to turn the page to get ready for Penn State. Now, I think we are going to, but
Yep.
right now it's like completely one direction. What's it like up in Penn State?
So Penn State's going to finish with the top 15 class for 2024. No drama. I like that Penn State has gone through all of these changes. I don't know that I necessarily like all the change. Manny Diaz to Tom Allen, right? You're getting a very good defensive coordinator, but in a lot of cases for other programs, unlike Penn State, you might lose some players to the transfer portal because a coach leaves or a coach is fired. And that's somebody that you commit to. And James Franklin pointed this out in a press conference that he asks the players if they're going to commit to him and commit to Penn State. And that's very telling for multiple reasons. One, you create a foundation, you create stability. Okay, because Manny Diaz was always going to take a head coaching job unless this was a dumpster fire at Penn State, and it never was. It was far from it. He talked about Jay1 Sider, the running backs coach, one of the better recruiters on Penn State staff, possibly taking a head coaching job in the future. Said the same thing about Anthony Poindexter, safeties coach. And he says, commit to me. James Franklin. Well, that also says something too, that if he's very open and honest about that Penn State players, or if players need to commit to James Franklin, that means Franklin's not going anywhere for any foreseeable future, that there's no plans, there's no idea, there's no secondary thought that, well, Franklin could be on his way out, or Franklin could take another job, or some higher bidder is going to come in and try to take James Franklin away. Some Penn State fans are going to be that great. That's foundation. That's awesome. Stability. Other fans are like, I can't wait for him to leave as soon as possible. So for those fans, you're not going to get your wish anytime soon.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast and Locked On Nittany Lions podcast your first listen of the day. We're just getting started. As players continue their opt-outs, we're getting an idea who's going to play in the game. What should we watch for in the Peach Bowl? When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That is why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools that you need to help the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Now, I don't need to put any this. Hiring somebody for your small business is like hiring a football coach in a way. If you hire the right guy, he's going to have you in the conversation for the playoff. If you hire the wrong guy, you're going to be making that hire again in 3 years. The only difference is in the real world, you might be making that hire again in 3 weeks, not 3 years. LinkedIn just isn't another job board. It's a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many qualified candidates. So easy, in fact, that 80% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, and you don't have the resources to go through this over and over and over again. So thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even just launched a new feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process a little bit even more easy and quicker. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Zach. So we talked about this transition from signing day, and it's a weird thing in a bowl game because you do on all the recruiting stuff, like one gear, and you're going 100 miles an hour one direction. You hit the brakes and you have to go another and play a football game. And add to all that, all of the opt-outs and the roster uncertainty that could happen. We all knew about Chop Robinson. We knew about the coordinators at Penn State. What else is going on with the opt-out situation at Penn State?
So Penn State's been pretty good with the opt-out situation. The only other player so far to actually take himself out of the bowl game, and I don't even know that it's actually official. It's only been reported that Johnny Dixon intends to opt out of the bowl game. So maybe something's changed over here and I'm missing something, but we can expect that Chop Robinson and Johnny Dixon, the cornerback, starting cornerback aside from Kalen King, right now at this time in the week of December 18th. So anything can change over the course, right? We're talking about this on December 20th on a Wednesday for early National Signing Day, but we're still looking to see, does a Kalen King opt out as well? Because everybody who has declared for the draft, a Theo Johnson, a Caden Wallace, those guys have said that they are going to play. Adisa Isaac is another one, surprisingly enough. Curtis Jacobs. I thought those guys were going to opt out as well because they have some draft stock to preserve and they're going to play. That sets a nice example for not only just the recruits, right? But also the players that are actually within the program that are eventually going to take over these leadership roles in just the next season or two. But I'm eager to see what decision does Kalen King make about playing in the bowl game because he was projected as a top 15 pick, and then this season didn't go quite as planned. Gave up some more yardage than anticipated, and because he's got a twin brother in Kobe King, I'm starting to think about this. Maybe these two want to leave together rather than be broken apart because I don't see Kobe King's timeline as leaving for the NFL in this cycle. I see that as 2025. So maybe the two could go together. And Kalen King, I think, has a little more to prove because of a down season this in 2023.
One thing that I find that's really interesting, and Ole Miss goes through this quite a bit. I think the pendulum on opt-outs is kind of swinging the other direction. We're starting to hit equilibrium
Yep.
to where if you are a top 10 pick, yes, opt out. Absolutely. That's far
Oh,
too
yeah.
much money to even mess with it. But at the end of the day, football players play football. And that is kind of what is winning out right now. Ole Miss had Matt Corral famously in the Sugar Bowl a couple years ago. He played in the bowl game, actually got re-injured in the bowl game, but he played in the bowl game. This year, they're not having any true opt-outs. The only eligibility issue that they'll have is Spencer Sanders is not going to be available in the game.
Yep.
And that's just a situation to where it's not an opt-out thing. It's an eligibility thing, which is that normal tried and true bowl thing that most schools have had to go through over the years. That's actually a good thing. And Ole Miss fans are probably pretty excited about that because there's been a camp when Spencer Sanders came in that thought that he was kind of extra in the quarterback room and everything was building with the backup. Everybody was wanting to see Walker Howard. Everybody wanted to see that. And there's a camp that said, hey, every snap that Spencer Sanders takes is a wasted rep that Walker Howard could have.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this Peach Bowl, just Walker Howard being the next man up on that, there's going to be people watching this game about, hey, are we going to get a glimpse? Now, we're not going to have a quarterback competition or anything like that in the going into the spring, but Walker Howard's one of those uber elite talented football players that Ole Miss fans just are ready to see.
Oh, and I remember him as the LSU commit, and then he ultimately transferred to Ole Miss. And I know what talent is in that quarterback room, and I'm wondering, just because he is talented, how much longer he's going to want to wait because Jaxson Dart is returning, and he's not going to displace him. I don't think there's going to be a quarterback battle next season. And you don't want to wish injuries upon anybody, but that's the only way that I see Walker Howard getting his opportunity for against Jaxson Dart.
Yeah, in this season, the way Jaxson Dart plays quarterback, and you'll notice this in the Peach Bowl, is he literally plays quarterback like a linebacker. I mean, it's absolutely nuts. He starts running and you're like slide, and he's trying to jump over the top of people and things like that. And he's 230 pounds, so he's not like the super athlete guy to begin with. So he is prone for the helmet to come off. He is prone for a little nick that'll take him out for a couple of plays. So the backup quarterback for Ole Miss is actually, it has to be ready to go at any moment. And I think Walker Howard sees that he's willing to wait through the next year potentially. But the one that I'm interested about will be the third string quarterback, and that's Austin Simmons. He's a little left-handed quarterback out of Florida. He actually classed up 2 years to go to college. He's 17 years old right now. He throws 95 to 96 miles an hour from the left-handed side. And he is going to graduate college because of the AP courses he took in high school, December of 2024. So that is probably the one that Ole Miss fans are going to look at because he still has that free one-time transfer available to him.
No, and I remember seeing him as a prospect and just that factor, what he's done in school, reclassifying, committing to Ole Miss too. I mean, thank goodness Ole Miss is not in the Big Ten because I look at the likes of Oregon right now that have done just. I don't know if this is standard. It feels like the Ducks and Dan Lanning seem to get those last second commits on early National Signing Day and really make an impression. They're taking players from Ohio State. They're taking players from USC. It's just like, man, that's coming to the Big Ten. So it's kind of, I would say, it's similar and identical to what Ole Miss is doing. It's like, thank goodness that's in the SEC. You're not seeing that with Oklahoma and Texas. You're seeing the teams that are already firmly in the Southeastern Conference. Ole Miss, I'd say a little bit of Alabama, just from what we've seen on early National Signing Day here. That I don't know that you want to go up against the Rebels in 2024. I really don't. But it's a nice. Like I said, I've always framed this as it is a good measuring stick for both programs to see, okay, if Ole Miss wins, what does that do for 2024 with the additions that you're adding? And then for Penn State, Penn State isn't subtracting a lot, but they're not adding a whole lot either. They're returning a lot. So if you can beat Ole Miss at this level, that's a good indicator for where you're going to start 2024, even though you are going to get a new offense and a new defense. I don't think you're going to deviate so much on defense. You're going to get similar type of stuff, just you're going to have more Tom Allenisms in this case. But Andy Kotelnicki, I think, is going to have a completely different strategy. And I hope so, because what Mike Yurcich was doing wasn't working. But my point being, if you can win in this situation right now against Ole Miss, and then you're adding those elements, it's not so much about the player, it's more about the coaching staff and the leadership, and then the veteran experience that is coming back for Penn State. So Ole Miss is capitalizing on all these additions that can make the program better. It's the little things that don't show up in the box scores for Penn State that that make you hopeful for what they can be in a 12-team playoff.
Whenever we come back, I'm going to have a question because I cannot pronounce the last name of your offensive coordinator coming in. I apologize.
Kotelnicki.
But he is not an offensive coordinator that you think, looking at what Kansas had, that Drew Aller matches up with stylistically with. Now, is there somebody in the wings that might be a better fit for what he's doing? I'll have questions about that whenever we come back in just a second, but I do want to say there's still more to come on this Locked On podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We take a temperature check of each fan base leading up to the game and figure out stylistically how Penn State's offense might look a little bit different next year as opposed to what they have this year. I do want to say, as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers Stay Hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking of joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Thanks for making this Locked On podcast your first listen of the day, and shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. Be part of history. All right, Zach. I mentioned this going into the break, and I just wondered, Drew Aller's, I may probably, if I butcher her last name, I apologize. But how would he stylistically fit in the offense that it looks like Penn State is going to be running next year? Is this an audition of sorts for him going into the spring and into the fall?
Drew Aller's the starting quarterback one way or the other, whether it's Kotelnicki's offense or former Mike Yurcich, or if they were to, for some reason, if they had promoted J1 Sider, Ty Howell. Drew Aller, I don't want to say he is not a player that is, I guess, a scheme type of quarterback in a sense. Like, no, you're not going to put him into a triple option, obviously, but everyone says, well, so-and-so's a system quarterback, or so-and-so wouldn't be able to flourish without this coordinator or this coach. I feel like Drew Aller is systemless because of all the things that he can do with his arm talent. The utter disrespect, Steven, that I've seen, if you go onto X and you search Drew Aller's name into the search bar, and just the absolute garbage, trash takes, the negativity, because the media companies get it right when they're looking at Heisman candidates for next season and they nominate who are the top 10 quarterbacks. And Drew Aller's not in the top 3, because this past season didn't really deserve to be, but he should be in the discussion when it comes to top 10. And then hopefully a coordinator like an Andy Kotelnicki will be able to vault him into the top 5. To answer your question directly, Drew Aller fits in this offense because Andy Kotelnicki is going to be smart and tailor his needs to Drew Aller's needs. Okay. You had Jalen Daniels, who was a dual threat quarterback. and Bean as well at Kansas that could do other things. Drew Aller's not a statue. He's not a track star either, but he can move. They're going to run the way that Kotelnicki talked about it. They're going to run spread elements. They're going to run a spread base with pro style elements. So you're combining the best of both worlds. The spread offense works in college because you just create so much more open space with the athletes. In the NFL, it doesn't work like that because there's still a discrepancy in athleticism. You and I know that at the college level. At the NFL, yeah, you have the Tyreek Hills, but everybody else is kind of already in the same group of athleticism. When it comes to college, Nicholas Singleton can just absolutely burn by defenders, but that's not going to be the case in the NFL as easily, right? So that's what Andy Kotelnicki's doing. He's marrying the spread concepts with the pro style elements of the NFL because those two things can, one, they just spread out a defense and make it difficult to cover large areas for these super athletes at Penn State, and then confuse them with all the other mechanics that are going to be thrown into it. So I'm excited for Andy Kotelnicki. I'm excited for Drew Aller because he has all the physical tools. It's just a matter. If I'm going to criticize anything about Drew Aller, it's his confidence, because as a quarterback, you have to be stone cold. You have to be rock solid when adversity hits. And I feel like Drew Aller, in the 2 losses in the season, he did not necessarily respond the way I would have wanted him to as a leader of this team. And I think that will come. Remember, he's only 19, turning 20 years old. So that will develop, but all the physical tools are there, Stephen. It's just a matter of him getting situated with how he approaches the game from a mental standpoint.
All right, going into this football game, what are a couple of position matchups that you'll be looking for? Is like, hey, I know that this game is going well if this happens.
Well, it's going to be close. We still know that from the spread, right? If I'm looking for head-to-head matchups, it's Penn State has to be able to do enough offensively, because I think Ole Miss is going to get theirs. Chop Robinson opting out, Johnny Dixon, one of your starting corners. You could potentially have a Kalen King, even though I don't think so as much. I think Kalen King will more likely play in this game, but we don't know. That's a toss-up there. The passing attack that you have with 3 different options for Jaxson Dart, Ole Miss is going to put up points, and you lose Manny Diaz coaching this defense. Yeah, Anthony Poindexter was the co-defensive coordinator, and within the system, you still have Terry Smith, another assistant coach there working on the defense. But you're going up against an Ole Miss team that's going to be healthy, completely reloaded, playing for the start of the 2024 season. No opt-outs, no draft, not a lot of draft considerations here, right? So Penn State, the offense that struggled this season, it's really just, can Penn State's offense do enough finally? Because that was the problem. Penn State's defense did everything and then some, all the extracurriculars to keep the team in every game or put them well out in front. And it felt like the offense was the weak link, just continually holding them back. Because if the offense had just my goodness, up until late in the game for both things, 17 points against Ohio State up until, 13 in this case, 13 against Ohio State until late in the 4th quarter. And then Michigan getting that ball inside the 30 and then easily scoring a touchdown. Up until that point, they had 17. So that defense held Ohio State and Penn State, or Michigan, to 13 and 17 respectively. You got to do the same thing against arguably the better offense. I think Ole Miss's offense is better than Michigan's and better than Ohio State's in this case. I know they have Marvin Harrison Jr. I know Michigan's in the college football playoff, but from a team effort, those teams are better. But Ole Miss's offense specifically, Penn State's got to be able to go toe-to-toe with that group.
You know, what I'm looking at is the tackles versus the ends. That is the whole thing. I think if Jaxson Dart has time to throw the football, Ole Miss is going to be able to eat a little bit in this football game. It's going to be dependent on the ends and Penn State in general to create pressure. If that happens, they can kind of muck it up. They can do the stuff that Penn State's done all year. And you have a situation to where everybody always says great defense beats great offense. And that's because they can muck it up and things like that. If Ole Miss can give Jaxson Dart time, and if Ole Miss can vary the tempo of the release time of the quarterback, I'm not talking about the time in between plays.
Yeah.
I'm talking about 1-step, 3-step, and 5-step drops, to where the defense just doesn't know that, hey, I've got 2.5 seconds to get there. You have a chance to be more successful, especially with the athletes that Ole Miss has. And I think that Ole Miss's defense this season has feasted on mid to below average offenses. And I'm not saying Penn State has one of those, but Ole Miss's defense needs to step up. Will that performance move up to the next level? Those are the things that I'll be looking for in this ballgame.
I mean, from a statistical standpoint, yes, Penn State's offense has been mediocre. You just look at yards per carry, yards per rush, and then yards per pass. And Penn State's what? Outside of and the only reason the running game might be a little better is just because they had the opportunities to continue to pepper these defenses and wear them down because the defense for Penn State did so well to set them up. But you look at yards per pass attempt, yards per rush attempt, they're not great. They're not overly dominant. They are middle of the pack. So, Steven, you are fair and correct in that assessment saying that Penn State's offense was middle of the pack. They just weren't that good.
Yeah, but also I think that a lot of that is stylistically. As I look at the numbers in the Big Ten, I just think offense in the Big Ten plays that way. Stylistically, it works. Yeah. And you're going to see such a conflicting style that happens. I do not think that Penn State's defense is as good as their numbers. I do not think that Ole Miss's offense is as good as their numbers. I think it's somewhere a little bit closer than we think it is. And because of that, I'm going to give the score when we're back in Thunderdome next week. Yeah. I'm right now, I'm like at a field goal game either way.
And I mean, that's what Vegas has had it as all along. It's been it opened up at 2.5. It's moved to 3.5 in favor of Penn State. So that score, right, with the 48.5 total is set around somewhere in the ballpark. You're looking at somewhere in the ballpark between 24-21 and 27-24. I think that's totally fair. I don't think people should underestimate Ole Miss's defense. And that's so, yes, head-to-head battles. The secondary, I think Ole Miss's wide receivers against a secondary that's going to be a little lacking is something to keep an eye on for sure, because you have veteran wide receivers going up against. And I asked Terry Smith at the press conferences today for early National Signing Day, just, you're anticipating, you don't know for sure, but what is Kalen King going to do? Johnny Dixon's not going to be back next season. We know that. What about Daquan Hardy? If you're losing 3 starters, who's just impressed you in this time during the, not the offseason, but the preseason for 2024? And he mentioned Cam Miller. Well, Cam Miller's now a veteran in the program at the cornerback spot, but Elliott Washington is a first-year player. And they're going to be going up against the likes of Tre Harris for Ole Miss. Harris is going to have a field day. I hate to say it, unless Penn State can get pressure on Jaxson Dart. And then you have Quinshon Judkins to make things a little more respectable and have Penn State to prevent them from being a little too blitz happy, because even though Manny Diaz isn't in Happy Valley, they're still going to do that. Penn State's still going to run the same offense. They're going to run the same defense for this game specifically. So don't think that all these schematics are going to change because coordinators have changed for different reasons, right? But I just look at that and I say, those veteran wide receivers that all have 700 plus yards in this Ole Miss offense, you have 3 different options to go to against possibly 2 first-year corners and he'll be a first-year starter going into next season. That does not bode good news for Penn State in this case.
That is absolutely the case. And I do want to thank you, Zach, very much for stopping by. And thanks to everybody for making Locked On your first listen. Every dayers, we're going to have all the Peach Bowl stuff on both of our channels and all the recruiting talk that you'll ever need. So check in all week for that and throughout the next week for your second listen. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of plus our national shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. For those of them on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Hotty toddy, and we are right. Thanks, Zach.
We are. Yep.